CEOs talk about AI. HPE looks for leaks. Microsoft goes meta for AI. VM migrations might be a little messy. Lenovo gets Infinidat. And we're going to take a closer look at the AI Diffusion Framework in this episode of the Gestalt IT Rundown. Good afternoon, everyone. It is Wednesday, January the 22nd, and this is the Gestalt IT Rundown. It has been a busy week for tech news, and we have a lot to be bringing you on this National Polka Dot Day. So we hope that you're seeing the dots that we're going to connect for you. Joining me this week is my wonderful co-host, Mr. Stephen Foskett. Stephen, it's good to see you again.
You said it's National Pokemon Day, right?
Close enough.
Yeah, because that's what they're going to catch them all, right? That's what you say when you got polka dots?
Yes. Yeah, that's what it is. But you know,
in
the
your
important
polka
thing,
dot deck?
we caught all the news stories. That was enough for us. I mean, do you know how much time and effort and walking around that takes? The good news is, though, that we've boiled it all down to the things that you need to know, and we're ready to jump in because, as you know, Tech Field Day and Gestalt IT are part of the Futurum Group, and the Futurum Group released one of the most impactful reports on AI to date. Working with global management consulting partnership Kearney, the report asked leading CEOs of companies with over $1 billion in revenue about their AI vision and thoughts. The report includes very important details like hurdles to AI integration and how older companies view AI versus those younger digitally native organizations. This comprehensive study has some of the most important information about the future of AI that has ever been collected. Stephen, you had a chance to read over this report. What are some of the things that you picked up on?
Well, it's actually a really interesting report. As you mentioned, this is basically, as far as I know, this is kind of the largest report or the largest study of its kind where CEOs were asked about their AI plans and their staff was asked as well. And this is really illuminating. I mean, frankly, the biggest takeaway from me, for me on this is that CEOs are perhaps overconfident in their ability to bring AI to the surface and the ability of their staffs and organizations to put that into practice, and the desire from their company or from their customers to buy into this. This doesn't mean AI is dead or doomed or any of that. I mean, this is a much more nuanced study, as happens from, science and math and so on. So if we look a little bit under the surface, we can see a couple of really interesting patterns. One of them is that there's a divergence between traditional companies and sort of digital native companies when it comes to AI. The traditional companies are taking a very different approach toward implementing AI, whereas the digital natives are running off a little bit faster there. As I said, another aspect is that CEOs overall seem to be overconfident, or maybe their staff are just underconfident. So big telling number. 78% of CEOs strongly believe that they are ready and able to guide their companies into this new AI world. But only 28% of mid-level managers share this optimism. That is, well, I guess probably not surprising to some of our listeners, but it is a big story. And it shows throughout the rest of this data set. CEOs are really intent on driving forward all of their AI plans, while their staff that are actually tasked with doing this have a lot more concerns. They are concerned about whether they'll be able to do it, whether they'll be able to actually bring it to market, whether it'll actually be transformative. And in many cases, the CEOs have heard this message too. So there's certainly a lot of skepticism there in terms of whether AI will be a transformative technology for their businesses or simply a way to increase efficiency. And furthermore, there's a concern, I think, from the CEOs that many of their customers aren't actually pushing for AI-based solutions. Only 24% of the CEOs here said that clients are explicitly saying we want AI-based solutions, whereas the other 3/4 of the CEOs are saying, yeah, customers aren't really pushing us in this direction. We're really moving forward because we feel like we have to. The same is seen when you look at things like AI governance. Only 22% of organizations have what would be effective AI governance platforms. Only 39% have change management in place. 2/3 say that they are concerned about the ability of low quality data or disconnected data being integrated into AI models. So overall, there's a lot of skepticism. There's a lot of concern. There's a bit of overconfidence. There's a bit of moving to where they think the puck is going to be going. And I think that really kind of percolates down through what we see in the industry as well. So, Tom, you and I and Alistair are talking about AI-based applications and AI solutions every week here on the Rundown. I think a lot of what this survey says and what this report says really jibes with what we're seeing from the industry, that, in many cases, this technology has gotten out ahead of us a little bit. But I do think that people are getting a little smarter about it. And I think that they're ready to say, maybe we're not quite ready with this. Maybe this is not quite a transformative technology yet. Maybe we should be focusing on data, focusing on governance, focusing on building readiness and figuring out what the best applications are for this technology instead of charging forward with it. So very, very interesting, really cool study. I do recommend checking it out if you can, using the links in our program notes. HPE is doing some detective work this week after they found out last week that one of their more successful breach crews, IntelBroker, has made off with some of their information, including product source code. IntelBroker decided to have an after Christmas sale and is offering the code on various forums, as well as some personally identifiable information from older HPE delivery records. While you should always take criminal claims with a grain of salt, IntelBroker has been implicated in a number of similar thefts over the years that have turned out to be accurate. Tom, what does this mean to HPE and, more importantly, to HPE's customers?
This is probably bigger news for HPE than it is for anybody else, because once you get a hold of somebody's source code, that's a problem, especially if it's out there. And note that HPE didn't find out about this because they got a ransom notification from IntelBrokers wanting to sell the source code back. They found out because IntelBrokers was like, hey, what do you want for it? We would rather sell this to everybody than basically have that right of first refusal ransomware payment. That tells me that this isn't about extortion. This is about embarrassment. This is about trying to get as much of HPE's code base out there in the wild so that other actors can operate on it, right? Because once you have the source code for products, you can comb through it to find, poor memory management techniques or bad authentication calls or things like that. And that opens you up to a whole world of trouble. I will say, though, that the PII that they got seems to be one of those weird, and we're going to grab your dog's leash on the way out the door of robbing your house kind of things. It was more or less kind of incidental and inconsequential because they pulled it from a bunch of old orders that had been placed. And obviously any PII leaking is bad enough, but that would be kind of like if you leak the address that I lived at 25 years ago. Is it bad that someone has my old address? Probably, but I don't live there anymore. So I think that ultimately what's going to happen out of this is that HPE really needs to find out how IntelBrokers got in and what source code is affected, and if it's modern enough that they really need to worry about what potential leaks could come out of this. I mean, as you know, HPE has bought a lot of companies recently, and they're really revving a lot of their products to incorporate new code into the things that they've been offering. So, if you stole the code for, I don't know, like Microsoft Windows 3.1, are you really getting a good deal on this? Or are you just kind of, oh, hey, look, I embarrassed you because I got stuff from you? So I'm kind of glad that HPE is taking this wait and see approach. The trick, though, is that you can't let us wait too long before you let us know what was taken so that we can prepare appropriately. Because as one of the things that we've seen a lot over the last few months, when companies sit on these kinds of breaches or on these kinds of exposures, the uncertainty in the air makes customers decide maybe down the road, I'm not going to invest in this company anymore if they can't keep me up to date on what's going on. We're going to turn to Microsoft now because they're building a dedicated AI group that has a familiar face at the helm. The core AI platform and tools division is going to be led by former head of meta engineering, Jay Parikh. This new office will pull in folks from the AI development teams along with some of the denizens of the office of the CTO to focus on building an AI platform that will be used both internally and externally. The move was noted in a memo from Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella, who says that AI is compressing 30 years of change into 3 years. Microsoft, according to Nadella, needs an AI-first app stack powered by Azure. You may recall that Parikh was hired by Microsoft back in October. Although he had not had a clearly defined role up until this point, he will now report directly to Nadella and will be a part of the core Microsoft management team. Stephen, are we expecting good things to come out of this new AI division?
I would say certainly yes. Parikh has an incredible reputation. He is very much respected technically and also as a manager. He's one of those people like Satya Nadella who has been able to combine that sort of engineer's background with the management chops to get a large organization up and running. And he's also had a very, very diverse set of responsibilities. While he was at Meta, he worked on a variety of different projects, including subsea cables and a project regarding drones. This is a guy who has been able to get technical people to deliver really incredible new inventive solutions to problems. And so it makes sense that Nadella would tap somebody like that, first off, to join the company, but second off, to come in and take over their AI engineering group. The other thing to note here is that, Parikh, although he's been involved in a lot of product companies like Lacework, he really seems to be more somebody who's interested in application of technology than in developing technology for technology's sake, which is probably another thing that Nadella is looking for here, because the ultimate winner of this AI tools battle is going to be the company that can give the people what they want in terms of, helping enterprises deploy AI applications. Like I talked about in our previous segment, where we talked about the new Kearney and Futurum study of CEOs' insights into how they're going to be using AI. It is very obvious that CEOs need to figure out what their company's angle is going to be on this new technology. They need to figure out how they're going to roll it out, how they're going to deliver this. And having somebody like Parikh there within Microsoft being the one to develop supporting technologies for customers, I think bodes well for Microsoft to continue their actually very strong AI game. So overall, I would say this is a good move. I think it's going to have lasting impacts beyond the Azure AI Microsoft stack. And I think that it will be something that will, I think we're going to be watching and hearing news coming out of that team and out of Parikh himself over time. Furthermore, I would say that this, I'm not trying to say that anything's going to go on with Satya Nadella, but I think this sets up Jay Parikh actually as a future exec to keep an eye on within Microsoft. Tom, moving away from VMware by Broadcom is going to cost people a lot of resources. At least that's what Gartner VP analyst Michael Warlow is saying. A survey published this week says that having external help to manage a VM could cost you between $300 and $3,000 per machine. And the project could take 2 years, depending on how much time you need to move it. In further breakdowns, the analyst says that teams of a dozen people could take more than a month to scope the project and start the migrations. Included in this report is the fact that VMware by Broadcom provides more than just virtualization support. You got to think about networking, storage, management tools, and other components. I think that as people are looking toward the option of moving away from VMware, they're facing this same challenge, Tom. That's what we're hearing at our Cloud Field Day event.
Yeah, and I would like to quote my friend and fellow Field Day delegate Jody Lemoyne from this morning, because he just spent the whole weekend moving some VMs, and his first thought was, man, I should have charged more for that. This is an interesting little data point, if you will. I mean, one of the things that I will laud Gartner for is they definitely know how much things cost, because they do a lot of work trying to figure out what the average costing for a particular project would be and things like that. Having said that, that's a really wide gap, right? Like they were basing this idea off of an organization that has about 1,000 VMs running off of about 100 servers, which I don't know about you, but to me, that is kind of a medium sized enterprise. There's no SMB I know of that manages 1,000 VMs. So I think you're going to see a little bit of a relevancy gap here. For an enterprise that is trying to move whole hog off of VMware onto some other platform, it's going to take time, right? This is not something that your CEO is going to walk in on a Wednesday and you guys are going to be finishing up by Saturday. You know, there's a lot of information that has to be collected. There's a lot of things that need to be sorted out because a lot of certain software has requirements that need, you know, maybe it needs a specialized piece of hardware, or maybe it needs some other kinds of attachments. I mean, let's be honest, if these companies are still running on VMware, there's probably a good reason why they haven't moved those workloads more to some kind of a cloud platform or something like that. So there's obviously something sticky keeping them there. With that being said, though, I think there's also a bit of a problem with this whole, well, this is what the external companies are going to be charging, so this is how you should consider costing it out inside your organization to make those moves, which makes me wonder if maybe VMware by Broadcom didn't have some input into this. Not saying they did. I'm saying that if you make it expensive to move away from a product, or maybe just about the same price as staying on, say, VMware Cloud Foundation, maybe companies won't be moving quite so quickly. Because I will say that in the report, he did mention that he's worried that people are going to spend 2025 looking at all of their peers about trying to make a decision whether they're going to be moving off the platform or not, and waste a whole year of collecting that information. If I were those people, here's what I would do. I would nail down all of my VMs. I would make sure there were no specific requirements that needed to be done. I would start the planning process for a migration. Maybe you don't do it, but when you finish with it, you'll know what you've got, what can be moved, what can't be moved, and how quickly you could accomplish it. And if it turns out that it's better to move 50% of your environment and can be done quickly, do you know what we call that in the business? Negotiation. Because when the renewal comes up, you can walk in and say, well, if I don't get the price I'm looking for, you're going to lose 50% of your business tomorrow, because I can do that. But anyway, that's just my opinion. Lenovo is looking to shore up their storage chops, and they're taking a bite out of Infinidat. News broke last week that Infinidat is being bought for an undisclosed amount. Lenovo, which you probably know more than anything else for their consumer devices, also has a significant stake in the enterprise because they purchased the IBM X Series server line. Now, that acquisition happened about a decade ago, and since then, Lenovo has really been selling third-party storage lines like EMC and NetApp. The move is seen as a way to help Lenovo compete against the industry titans of HPE and Dell in the space and provide options for customers who are looking for more advanced technologies like AI. Stephen, Infinidat is a company that has presented at Tech Field Day in the past. What do you think about this deal?
Well, I think that it's a great move for Lenovo. I think it's probably going to be good for customers. And I think that it really does create a solid competitor for Dell in the high-end storage market. So as you mentioned, I heard those magic three letters, EMC. They were the undisputed leader in high-end storage for quite a while, a couple of decades. Their only real competitor was HP and their partner Hitachi in the high-end world. And then along came Infinidat, essentially the brainchild of the founder of a lot of the EMC high-end storage solutions. Infinidat produces really, when I say high-end, I mean high-end, excellent storage. They were really the only game in town to challenge Dell EMC, which is now basically Dell PowerMax, in that market. And Infinidat has done fairly well, considering that they were a smaller company, an independent company, that they didn't have the resources that a global IT manufacturer like Dell had. They really have been holding their own for many years. Now, Lenovo, as you mentioned, has partnered with many companies. Notably, I should mention NetApp. They have done a lot of work with Lenovo, but they really haven't been able to compete in the high-end market. Well, now they sure can. Essentially, they have now, it's as if somebody, in the in the sports car market bought Lamborghini to go up against Ferrari, or somebody bought Patek Philippe to go up against a high-end watchmaker here. It is really a gold-plated product, and Lenovo, I think, is going to be able to push this thing out pretty widely. I expect as well that as Infinidat has been doing, they've been bringing their technology to the cloud. They've been bringing it to AI. They've been bringing it more to the mid-range, though mid-range is still a higher-end product than most of us have experienced in storage. And I think that we're going to see Lenovo really making hay with this incredible technology. It's great news also for existing Infinidat customers, because, of course, they now have the resources of one of the world's leading IT suppliers behind them, and they can be sure that their systems are going to continue to be supported, and probably not going to be run over the coals by somebody looking for excessive profit taking or anything, because that's not really Lenovo's style. Lenovo basically builds and ships and supports stuff, and customers seem to like them. So I would say this is a very, very good move for pretty much everyone involved. Congratulations to the folks at Infinidat, and congratulations, Lenovo. You got a good product there. I actually am surprised that it ended up being taking this long for a company to realize that Infinidat was a prime acquisition target, and I'm glad to see this is where it went.
Well, Stephen, we wanted to take a closer look at a story that we actually spoke about last week. You may recall that there was an executive order that had been issued by now former President Biden around AI export controls. Now, we've seen some more information that's been released around this AI diffusion framework, and we wanted to dig a little bit deeper into it. One of the big things that came out that caught my eye was that there were reports that third-party actors were basically evading all of these sanctions by purchasing AI hardware and reshipping it to countries where it was banned. And then we were also seeing that perhaps some of these companies were getting around those restrictions by just renting that AI hardware in the cloud through data centers in countries like Malaysia and Brazil. Well, now the AI Diffusion Framework has named 18 so-called friendly countries that have no restrictions on AI exports. There are an additional 23 countries that are embargoed with either restrictions or caps on the number of AI chips that can be shipped to them. What about the other 150 countries in the world? Well, they're in some kind of a limbo where there are some restrictions, but maybe not others, and they depend on which country you're in, and it's not 100% clear. All of these restrictions are being calculated based on something known as total processing performance, or TPP, which is a metric that judges how powerful a chip is, and therefore how likely it is to be restricted for export to one of these so-called tier 2 or tier 3 countries. Now, Stephen, you didn't get a chance to weigh on this last week, but you are one of the experts about AI around here, and we wanted to know, what were your thoughts on this, and can you give us some context around this order, as it appears that it is still in effect in the new presidential administration?
Yeah, I've been complaining on the rundown for a year or more about the fact that it looks like there's been quite a lot of folks doing end runs around the administration's efforts to restrict the export of AI. So on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's actually spurred a lot of domestic manufacturing and technology in China that is actually looking pretty darn competitive versus what's happening in the West. Let's take a look at the first part. As you mentioned, we've had these restrictions based on total processing performance, as well as performance density of chips, for quite a while. But as you mentioned, what's been happening is there's been a lot of reshipping through seemingly friendly countries. There's been a lot of renting through data centers. And frankly, it's been hard to implement these rules. Well, the AI Diffusion Framework really is a strong response to that. I was actually quite shocked to see how nuanced and how firm this rule is. And I suspect that if the Trump administration is smart, they will continue this framework because, frankly, it looks like a pretty solid 2.0 in terms of restricting access to AI chips. Also, I would point out that the whole reason for this thing to exist is an admission from the US government that effectively whoever controls AI controls the world going forward. That's a pretty serious statement. And I think that it's going to be hard for anyone to doubt that these models are going to be truly transformative in many ways in terms of economic superiority, military superiority, and that sort of thing. So let's look a little bit deeper about how this works. As you mentioned, it effectively divides the world into three segments. We have the tier one companies, which are basically companies that, or I'm sorry, countries where the US feels confident that they're going to enforce the same kind of restrictions and controls on AI technology that the US itself would. So in addition to countries that you might expect, like the Five Eyes countries, Canada, England, New Zealand, Australia. This includes many companies in Europe, including France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the Republic of Korea, that sort of thing. So these are companies that the United States effectively is saying, you know what, you're good to go. You can have this stuff. You can export it. The tier three countries are the ones that are strongly restricted, and that includes China, Russia, Afghanistan, Somalia, Sudan, Syria, places like that, where they really don't want these things being exported. The interesting thing, though, is what's happened in the middle, this tier two. Now, some countries have actually seen their access to AI technology decreased. So, for example, I'm just going to put it out there: Switzerland is no longer on the friends list for the United States when it comes to AI technology. Same with Israel, Brazil, India. I think that that's going to cause a little bit of friction, and maybe there might be a little shuffling on who's on which list. On the other hand, some countries have seen their access to AI technology upgraded. Countries, for example, including like Yemen. I'm not sure exactly why they should be have more access to AI technology than in the past. The same is true of many of the Arabian Peninsula countries who've seen their access opened up a bit by this ruling. But that's not the whole story. Really, what's happening, the next step here is to have validated end users. In other words, the US really wants to know, where are these chips going? And they're restricting that as well, which I think is actually a really good move because, of course, there's been a lot of rumors that some countries have been basically buying and then reselling these chips to restricted nations. So the validated end users are basically companies like the hyperscalers, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, those sort of folks. And they're able to access this technology and to buy it up. And the ruling would basically force those countries to have their compute located in tier one countries. They can't just buy chips and ship them to other countries, that sort of thing. And in fact, it restricts the amount of compute that they can have in some of these tier two countries, let alone tier three. It also requires American companies to have 50% of their compute power here in the United States, which I think really does upend some things. So what is all this going to mean? Well, first off, I think that it is going to have a chance of actually restricting access to some of this technology that hasn't worked so far. Second off, I think it's going to cause a little bit of disruption in the short term to some of the plans that had been out there for building data centers, for example, in places like Singapore and Brazil that may not have as much access and may not be as beneficial. It's also going to impact some of the companies that had been serving the global market for AI in locations like that, including a company called Oracle that you may have heard of, that has really built out quite a lot of AI infrastructure outside the United States. We could see some of that stuff being dismantled as a result of these rules. And ultimately, though, I have to return to what I've said on the rundown many times. Ultimately, what's going to happen is the more that they restrict access to this, the more likely it is that China specifically is going to build a homegrown AI infrastructure, and that they're going to continue to invest in chips and in models that are able to compete with the West, because I think they also see that this is really a make or break technology. So there are loopholes still. There are ways that companies can get around this regulation, most notably by buying small orders, many small orders of chips, and then combining them on the other side. That's pretty much unrestricted. And unfortunately, that's probably going to happen. The other thing that caught my eye in this is if there's a public open weight model that is of a certain size, then building models up to that size are unrestricted, which could be a perverse incentive for a company like China to invest in open weight, open source AI models in order to open up the market for their own AI models. Because effectively, by pushing the state of the art in open models forward, they would be also moving the goal lines for their own closed models. I see where that heads.
Well, I think those are all excellent points, Stephen. And a couple of things that I want to kind of bring up here is, if you remember, that the response to this from companies like NVIDIA was pretty full-throated. And I think that you can see that in the fact that now NVIDIA has to go back and look at all of those pending orders that they had and decide whether or not they can even ship those chips. I mean, obviously, we knew that they had, specific SKUs for companies like China that could only be fulfilled that way. But now, I mean, when you think about the number of data centers that were being built in places like Malaysia, in places like Brazil, that were more primed for infrastructure growth because they maybe did not have some of the demands that we see on the electrical grid, for example. Now you're going to have to go back and figure out if you can even send those things, because they're not tier 3 countries. They're not fully restricted, but they're kind of restricted. So I don't know. I don't envy any of those people by any stretch of the imagination. But I also worry that we're sliding back towards something that anyone who grew up in the late 90s and early 2000s may remember, when you had export restricted versions of Windows. Remember the special super secret 128-bit SSL keys were only available in the US, and you had to, you had to say that you were only going to use those on US systems, and they were export restricted to the axis of evil. You can't send anything more than a 56-bit encryption key to North Korea, for example. We're starting to see that again in that, only companies, or I'm sorry, I did it again, only countries that are friendly to us can do business with companies that have the best of the tools. Well, then you create, like you said, that situation where what happens if the Chinese get a hold of a piece of equipment that they can reverse engineer that's near enough that they can gain 90% of the functionality of the top tier stuff, only now it's locked inside of their ecosystem and they don't need us anymore. Granted, they're still going to be buying chips until they can get their domestic manufacturing processes up in place. But I saw a report today that the iPhone is the third most popular phone in China. And when you consider how popular that phone is in the rest of the world, you're like, well, how could it possibly be that? Because companies have figured out how to take what is important out of those devices, make them domestically, which makes them cheaper, and then provide that as a good enough system. And if you take this into account of some of the things that we saw earlier in that report from the Futurum group, it kind of makes you wonder, if the customers are not clamoring for AI as much as we thought they might have been, or at least they're not asking the companies that are providing it, does that mean that the market is still developing enough that countries that have found themselves on this list have time to play catch up? Because as you mentioned, tier 2 is weird. Like obviously there are maybe the countries that we're not 100% sold on that they would, back us up in a fight or something like that. And then you have companies like Yemen, who is pretty openly hostile to Western powers like the US. But then you think to yourself, if I was going to build a data center to do a whole bunch of AI processing, would I put it in Sana'a today, or would I put it in Riyadh, or Noam, or wherever? The thing is that I think that some of these country classifications, like you said, are going to be moved. But more importantly, it opens up the opportunity for those countries to work with the government to kind of say, okay, really, we're bros, we can work this out, to kind of get upgraded into that tier where they're not restricted. But I also wonder, does that mean that you're opening yourself up to basically US weapons inspections to ensure that, yes, you ordered these 95 serial numbers of these NVIDIA chips, and we need to know where all of those are in your building and how they're being used and what your customer list is? There may be countries that decide that whether or not they're friendly, they're just not up for that level of scrutiny, because as we've seen over the years, sometimes inspectors find what they're looking for, whether or not it's actually there or not. And I worry that companies that are uncomfortable with having to jump through those hoops may decide to just move around those restrictions completely by, I don't know, moving their headquarters to a place where they're no longer affected by those restrictions. And then that kind of creates this other weird, I don't know, Twilight Zone type situation where companies make one product for the domestic market, they make one product for the export restricted market, and then they make one product in another place that is not subject to any of that they can sell to whomever they want. And that just creates confusion. It creates chaos, and it creates the possibility that those companies could focus their development efforts in areas where they're not restricted. And then you get into the situation of, well, if we spend all this money on the CHIPS Act to make people build stuff here, but then we put restrictions on them so that they can't send that stuff that they made to countries where they can get top dollar for it, why are they going to continue to build factories here? Why don't they just dump them and go somewhere else? And I pray that the countries that have looked into this have done enough research to know which way the big tech companies are going to go. Well, as you can tell, this is a topic that's probably going to dominate the conversation on the rundown into the foreseeable future. But the good news is that we have a lot of upcoming events that can help you answer some of the questions that will be happening around these topic areas. And the first one of those starts next week. Stephen, what are you going to be doing?
Well, as luck would have it, we have an AI Field Day event. So if you're curious about how AI impacts the enterprise, this is the event for you. We're going to be hearing from companies like VMware by Broadcom, talking about private AI, Memverge, who are using their incredible memory snapshotting and cloning technology to make AI training and inferencing more efficient, and Kamiwaza, who probably knows more about deploying AI in the enterprise than most people. We'll also get some more insight into the report that we talked about here, the CEO AI Insights report, direct from the author. During that AI Field Day event, we're going to be doing some podcasts, some roundtable discussions, a great event overall. So do tune in on the 29th and 30th, Wednesday and Thursday next week.
And then coming up after that, we have some more exciting events. We're going to be doing Cloud Field Day, February 19th and 20th. Our friend Alistair Cook is going to be participating, and he's got a great group of companies that he's going to be bringing your way. Make sure you check out techfieldday.com for more details. But the week before that, I am going to be in the future. Well, more appropriately, I'm going to be in Amsterdam for Cisco Live EMEA 2025. They have had a lot of announcements around a lot of great advanced technologies as of late. And I have been told they're going to have some more great announcements that are going to be happening during the show. And we are going to have an opportunity to put those presenters in front of a Tech Field Day delegate audience to ask the kinds of questions that you want to have answered about them. So make sure you tune in February 11th and 12th in Central European time to check out all of those details. And then coming up in March on the 19th and the 20th, I'll be back in Pacific time with Networking Field Day. And we're going to have some exciting presentations around topics like SD-WAN, around network management and AI, and much, much more. And we'll be posting the list of delegates who will be attending, as well as the companies that will be participating on techfieldday.com just as soon as we get them finished and confirmed. We also want to thank you all for tuning in every Wednesday to be a part of the Gestalt IT Rundown. Remember that you can check us out on our website at gestaltit.com for show notes and links to the stories. You can follow us on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Gestalt IT video, or just look for the Gestalt IT Rundown in your favorite podcast application. That way you can listen to us and get the news that you need. We will be back next Wednesday. Myself and Alistair Cook will be hosting while Stephen's out doing AI Field Day. And we'll have another roundup of news that you're not going to want to miss. Until then, why don't you make sure you follow us on our social media platforms? And if you have any news that you want to bring our way, just send it on over, and I promise you we'll load it into the hopper and take a close look at it. Until then, for Stephen Foskett and Tom Hollingsworth, thanks for tuning in for this episode of the Gestalt IT Rundown. We will see you next week.